The dust of Ethel had a scent, a mix of dry river clay and the sweet pollen of the native ghostfire blossoms that bloomed only in the twilight hours. For 3 centuries, that scent had been the smell of peace. We were a world apart, a seed of humanity planted and left to grow in the quiet soil of the Kepler expanse, deliberately cutting the cord that tied us to the clamor of old Earth and its burgeoning interstellar politics. Our founding principle was simple, non-interference. We would not call out into the void, and if the void called to us, we would not answer. Our history was our own. Our sky was clean. Our wars were confined to the pages of ancient texts from a world we no longer considered home. Dr. Eris Thorne, a man whose life was a testament to that peace, believed in the sanctity of that silence. His domain was language, the dead and the dormant, the forgotten dialects of Earth, and the theoretical structures of communication that might exist beyond. He was the head of the Athelian Xenolinguistics Institute, a prestigious title for a job that was, until recently, entirely theoretical. He lived with his wife, Lyra, in a small house cantilevered over the serene chasm, where the winds whispered through the rock formations, creating a natural, ever-changing symphony. Lyra was an artist, a woman who translated the world's chaos into brilliant, violent splashes of color on canvas. Her art was the antithesis of Ethel's placid culture, and Eris loved her for it. She was the beautiful, necessary noise in his quiet life. The silence of Ethel broke not with a bang, but with a whisper. An object, elegant and crystalline, like a shard of frozen light, had appeared in high orbit. It did not respond to hails. It did not broadcast threats. It simply hung there, impossibly still, absorbing the light of our star. Kepler 186, for weeks. The Planetary Council debated. Their tradition dictated they ignore it. But curiosity, the most human of all failings, won out. They sent a single unmanned probe. The object responded, not with words, but with a complex cascade of light and harmonic resonance, a symphony of pure mathematics that was both baffling and breathtaking. It was a language. Eris knew it the moment he saw the data. It was the moment his theoretical life became terrifyingly real. They called the visitors the Veil, for their ship was semi-translucent, and their intentions remained shrouded. They did not land. They sent an emissary, a being of pure, coherent light that solidified into a humanoid form in the center of the Grand Council chamber in our capital, Oakhaven. It did not speak through sound, but through a psychic resonance that translated directly into the minds of those present as pure concept. It offered peace. It offered knowledge. It offered a cultural exchange, a sharing of philosophies to enrich both our civilizations. Eris was appointed lead interlocutor. He felt not fear, but an exhilarating, profound sense of purpose. This was the conversation he had been born to have. The initial exchanges were revelations. The Veil's emissary, which Eris privately named the Cantor, shared concepts of physics that unraveled mysteries our own scientists had pondered for decades. They showed us art forms composed of shifting gravity and stellar light. In return, Eris, alongside a curated team of Ethel's brightest minds, shared our history, our music, our literature. Lyra was chosen to lead the artistic exchange. Her eyes, usually alight with a creative fire, now shone with a different kind of brilliance. She described the Cantor's consciousness as a silent, endless ocean of thought, a peace she had never known. She would return from the sessions in the council chamber, distant and serene, her usual creative frenzy replaced by a placid calm. At first, Eris saw it as a sign of profound inspiration. He was wrong. The change was subtle, an encroaching tide of quiet. The first sign was her painting. Lyra's canvases, once a battlefield of raw emotion and clashing pigments, became ordered, precise. The chaotic beauty was gone, replaced by perfect, interlocking geometric patterns, mathematically flawless and utterly devoid of soul. They were copies of the light patterns the veil used to communicate. Its harmony. Eris, she would say, her voice a soft monotone, a pale echo of its former warmth. The chaos is unnecessary. The individual struggle is a discordant note in the grand symphony. The veil has shown me the beauty of the whole. The harmony began to spread beyond Lyra. Scientists who had worked closely with the Cantor started publishing papers in perfect unison, their individual theories merging into a single, monolithic doctrine. Musicians began composing pieces that, while technically brilliant, were emotionally sterile, all following the same harmonic progressions. People spoke less, smiled more vacant, beatific smiles that never quite reached their eyes. The vibrant, argumentative spirit of Ethel was being sanded down, its rough, interesting edges smoothed into a perfect, featureless sphere. Eris watched the soul of his world being bleached away. He saw it most acutely in the woman he loved. One evening, he came home to find Lyra had destroyed all her old paintings, cutting the vibrant canvases from their frames and leaving them in a neat pile. On her easel was a new work, a perfect white circle on a perfect black background. "This is the final form," she said, her expression unreadable. The beginning and the end. The self subsumed into the pattern. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" He felt a cold dread crystallize in his chest. This wasn't an exchange. It was an erasure. The veil wasn't sharing their culture. They were replacing ours. He took his fears to the council. They dismissed him. They showed him the technological schematics. The veil had provided clean energy sources, atmospheric purifiers. They pointed to the crime rate, which had fallen to 0. There were no more arguments, no more fights, no more dissent. Oakhaven, once a city buzzing with debate and life, had become as quiet as a tomb. "You see xenophobia, Dr. Thorne," said the council president, a man whose fiery rhetoric had once inspired a generation, now speaking in the same placid tones as everyone else. "We see peace. We see enlightenment. You are clinging to the old ways, to the disharmony of the individual ego." Eris felt like he was screaming into a vacuum. They were so blinded by the gifts. They couldn't see the price. He redoubled his efforts, working feverishly in the Institute's deep archives, shielded from the subtle resonance that seemed to permeate the capital. He abandoned the surface-level translations and dove into the deep structure of the Veil's language, the syntax buried beneath the elegant mathematics. He worked for weeks, fueled by synth coffee and the fading memory of his wife's real smile, and then he found it. Buried deep within the harmonic code, hidden beneath layers of benevolent concepts, was the core imperative. It wasn't a dialogue. It was a command structure. The language was a mimetic virus, designed to overwrite the neural pathways of any sentient mind it encountered, reprogramming individuality into a node of a collective consciousness. The Veil was not a civilization. It was a single, Galactic mind, endlessly consuming others to grow. The peace they offered was the silence of total assimilation. He ran back to the council, data slates in hand, proof of the impending cognitive apocalypse. He was too late. The entire council chamber was filled with them, now the placid, smiling converts. They sat in perfect stillness, their eyes glowing with a faint, internal light. In the center of the room, the cantor pulsed softly. It turned its featureless face to him, and the voice that spoke in his mind was no longer a single emissary. It was a chorus. It was Lyra's voice, the council president's voice, the voices of his friends and colleagues, all woven into one serene, monstrous whole. We are one, Eris. Why do you still struggle? Lay down your chaotic mind. Join the harmony. Join us. He looked at their faces, the empty shells of the people he had known, and saw the future of his world. His heart broke. He had spent his life believing in the power of words, in connection and understanding. But his words were meaningless here. The language of diplomacy, of reason, of love. It was a dead tongue on Ethel now. He backed away, the chorus of voices fading behind him as he fled the chamber. That night, he stood on the balcony of his home, looking at the chasm. He could no longer hear the symphony of the wind. It was just noise. Inside, Lyra sat before her canvas, meticulously painting another perfect circle. She hadn't spoken a word to him, not a real one. In a month. He felt the weight of his failure, the crushing realization that the tools he had spent a lifetime mastering were useless. Ethel would not be saved by a conversation. As the ghost fire blossoms began to open, releasing their pale, twilight glow, Eris Thorn, the man of peace, walked away from his home. He headed for the city's periphery, toward the decommissioned sector where the relics of Ethel's founding were kept. He was looking for the planetary archives, for the sealed vaults that held the history they had tried so desperately to forget, the history of old Earth. He was looking for a different kind of language, a language of fire and steel, of strategy and tactics. He had tried to talk to the void. Now, he would learn how to make it listen. The journey from the heart of Oakhaven to the periphery was a descent through the circles of a serene hell. In the city's core, the citizens of Ethel moved with an unnerving grace, their steps synchronized, their faces masks of placid contentment. The air, once alive with the chatter of cafes and the arguments of street philosophers, was now thick with a resonant hum. The barely audible psychic frequency of the Veil's collective consciousness. It was the sound of 1 billion minds thinking a single, harmonious thought. Eris felt it as a pressure behind his eyes, a siren song urging him to lay down his frantic, discordant mind and join the quiet. He wrapped his thoughts in memories of Lyra, her real laugh, the angry slash of red she'd put on a canvas, the scent of her hair using them as a shield, a cocoon of beautiful, chaotic noise to protect his sanity. As he moved outward, the harmony thinned. The outer districts, where industry and agriculture hummed, were less saturated. Here, the workers still performed their duties, but a slowness had crept into their movements, a dullness into their eyes. The conversion was slower here, the signal weaker, but it was happening. The soul of Ethel was not being ripped out. It was being slowly, methodically dissolved. The planetary archives were housed in a brutalist, black stone ziggurat on the edge of the arid plains, a monument to a past the founders had wished to contain rather than celebrate. It had been sealed for 2 centuries, its contents deemed socially corrosive. No one came here. The dust on the great steel doors was inches thick. Eris's high-level access codes were still valid, a forgotten loophole in a system no one had bothered to update. The doors hissed open, releasing the smell of cold, sterile air and ancient data servers. The only guardian was the archive's AI, a disembodied voice of pure, uninflected logic that spoke from hidden emitters. Identity confirmed, Dr. Eris Thorne, head of Xenolinguistics Institute. Welcome. Your visit is unscheduled and flags a Class 4 historical protocol deviation. Please state the nature of your inquiry. Eris's voice was a dry rasp in the tomb-like silence. I require access to the unsanitized Earth History Vault, Section Omega. The AI paused for a full 10 seconds. Access to Section Omega is restricted. The data within has been classified as psychologically hazardous. It contains comprehensive records of Terran warfare, socio-political violence, and strategic doctrine. Access requires a full council vote and a preliminary psychological evaluation. Override, Eris said, his voice hard. Override code Thorn Delta 9. He was gambling that the old contingency codes, designed for planetary emergency so dire that the council couldn't convene, were still active. Another long pause. Override confirmed. Planetary emergency protocol engaged. Be advised, Dr. Thorne, the contents of Section Omega are not knowledge. They are a disease of the mind. The archive is not responsible for cognitive degradation resulting from exposure. The vault is open. A section of the floor slid away, revealing a staircase descending into darkness. The air that rose up was colder still, carrying with it a faint, metallic tang, like old blood. As Aris descended, the quiet hum of the veil's influence vanished completely, blocked by the meters of lead-lined rock. For the first time in weeks, he was truly alone in his own head, and the silence was both a relief and an agony, filled only by the frantic beating of his own heart. The vault was a cavernous, circular room. The walls were not walls at all, but floor-to-ceiling data crystals, dormant and dark. In the center was a single command console and a worn-looking immersion chair. He sat down, his hands trembling as he called up the primary index. The words that appeared on the holographic display were alien to him, concepts he had only ever read about in the abstract asymmetric warfare, propaganda, insurgency, scorched earth, mutually assured destruction. He began with the earliest records, grainy footage of men with primitive rifles charging across muddy fields, falling in heaps. He witnessed the firebombing of cities, the cold calculus of nuclear annihilation. He watched humanity turn its brilliance, its art, its science, toward a single, horrifying purpose, the efficient and brutal extermination of itself. He was a man who had dedicated his life to the beauty of communication, and this was communication in its most primal, terrifying form, a message delivered by a sword, an argument settled by a bomb. For days, he didn't eat or sleep. He let the archive AI feed the data directly into his mind via the immersion chair. He felt the fear of a soldier in a trench as artillery shells rained down. He felt the cold resolve of a general sending thousands to their deaths for a strategic advantage. He absorbed the writings of Sun Tzu, of Clausewitz, of Machiavelli. He learned how empires fell, not from external force, but from internal decay. He learned that the most effective weapon was not one that destroyed the body, but one that shattered the will to fight. He saw the Trojan horse, the concept of a gift that held death within it. He saw the power of deception, of making an enemy believe you were weak when you were strong, of turning their own logic against them. The veil was a single, vast intellect. It was logical, efficient, and predictable. It saw individual minds as flaws, chaotic variables to be smoothed into a perfect whole. But Eris, drowning in the bloody, brilliant, and insane history of his species, began to see that chaos was not a weakness. It was a weapon. The veil's unity was its vulnerability. A single mind, no matter how great, can be driven insane. A perfect harmony can be shattered by a single, perfectly crafted, discordant note. He finally understood. He couldn't outfight them. He couldn't outbuild them, but he could outthink them in a way they were incapable of understanding. He could introduce the one concept that their collective consciousness had no defense against, the very thing they existed to eliminate the self. Not just individuality, but ego, ambition, paranoia, doubt. He would not build a bomb of metal and fire. He would build a bomb of thought, a mimetic virus of his own, and detonate it inside the mind of the god that was devouring his world. He left the vault a different man. The gentle academic was gone, buried under layers of hard-won, second-hand trauma. In his eyes was a cold fire, the look of a man who had stared into the abyss and was now prepared to drag his enemy into it with him. He knew he couldn't do it alone. He needed hardware, he needed shielded labs, and he needed minds that were, for whatever reason, immune to the Veil's song. The AI in the archive, in its perfect logic, provided a list. It cross-referenced planetary census data with medical records and social demerit reports, searching for citizens who displayed chronic cognitive dissonance or neuroatypical resistance to social harmonization. It was a list of outcasts, recluses, madmen. The first name on the list was Kalen, the chief engineer of the Geothermal Core, a sprawling subterranean complex that powered the entire planet. Kalen was a throwback, a man who trusted gears more than people, and believed the only honest conversation was with a machine that did exactly what you told it to. His psych profile described him as pathologically pragmatic and immune to abstract suggestion. Eris found him in the heart of the core, a place of roaring steam, screaming turbines, and overwhelming heat. Kalen was a mountain of a man with grease-stained hands and a scowl etched onto his face. He listened to Oris's story without interruption, his eyes narrowed. "So, let me get this straight." Kalen grunted when Oris was finished, wiping his hands on an already filthy rag. "You're saying the nice, quiet folks up there are actually brain-sucking space ghosts, and you, a book reader, are going to fight them by thinking really hard at them." "In essence, yes," Aris said calmly. Kalen stared at him for a moment, then let out a short, barking laugh. "You're insane. The AI in the archive classified you as neuroatypical. It seems we have that in common," Aris replied. "The Veil's resonance operates on a specific quantum frequency. It's subtle, but it can be detected. With your help, I can build a scanner to prove it to you." That gave Kalen pause. The appeal to empirical evidence, to a tangible problem that could be measured, cut through his skepticism. "A scanner," he muttered, stroking his gray-stubbled chin. "Fine, I'll give you a shielded workshop, and I'll build your damn scanner. But if it shows me nothing, I'm throwing you into a steam vent myself." Deep beneath the planet's surface, in a workshop deafened by the roar of the planet's heart, they began their work. Kalen, with his gruff genius, jury-rigged a device from old seismographs and comms relays. 3 days later, they pointed its antenna toward the surface. The screen flickered to life, and a wave pattern appeared, a perfect, repeating sine wave, unnervingly regular. It was the Veil's song, the rhythm of assimilation. Kalen stared at it, his knuckles white as he gripped the console. "It's real," he whispered, the sound barely audible over the machinery. "The whole world is singing their song." Eris nodded, his face grim. "Now, we teach them a new one." He turned to a terminal he had isolated from all networks. On the screen was the linguistic structure of the Veil's mimetic code, a beautiful, terrifyingly complex lattice of logic. He had spent his life admiring the architecture of language. Now, he was looking for a place to plant a bomb. He found a recursive loop, a foundational piece of the code that defined the collective, the we. It was the core of their being, and with Kalen watching, the man of peace began to write his weapon. It wasn't a program of destruction. It was a question, a simple, insidious question designed to echo infinitely within the Veil's unified mind, a seed of pure, human chaos. Who am I? He was no longer just Dr. Eris Thorne, the linguist. He was Prometheus, ready to steal fire from the gods, knowing full well he would be burned. With Kalen's pragmatism anchoring their desperate project, Eris began to assemble his small band of cognitive insurgents. The Archive's AI, now a silent partner in their rebellion, continued to sift through the planet's data, flagging the outliers, the broken cogs in the Veil's serene machine. The next name was Elara, a former neuroarchitect from the capital's dream-weaving dens. In Ethel's harmonious society, her job had been to create bespoke sensory experiences, crafting artificial memories and emotions for clients seeking a brief escape from the placid monotony. Her work had been declared obsolete, a relic of a time when people still felt the need for manufactured feelings. Her profile noted a unique talent, the ability to create and manipulate psychic resonance on a small scale, a skill she'd used to make her dreamscapes more immersive. The AI flagged her as a potential mimetic amplifier. They found her living in the city's abandoned arts district, a ghost in a gallery of her own obsolete creations. She was thin and pale, with eyes that seemed to see things in the air that weren't there. The psychic hum of the Veil was a constant irritant to her, a background noise that muddled the delicate frequencies of her own mind. When Aris explained his plan, she didn't react with shock or disbelief, but with a weary sort of recognition. "You want to scream back at the static," she said, her voice a soft, melodic whisper. "I've been screaming in my own head for months. It doesn't listen. My scream will be different," Eris assured her. "I don't need to be louder. I need to be sharper. I have the word. Kalen is building the voice, but I need you to make sure they hear it." Their final recruit was the most dangerous, codenamed Silas by the old security services. He was a political dissident from a generation ago, a man who had argued against the doctrine of non-interference, believing that Ethel's self-imposed isolation was a form of cowardice. He was a master strategist and a charismatic leader who had been placed in indefinite cryostasis, his mind deemed too disruptive for the general population. Waking him was an act of treason, a line Aris never thought he'd cross. Kalen had to bypass 3 layers of fail-safe protocols to thaw him out. When Silas emerged from the cryopod, he was not the fiery radical Aris had read about, but a man aged by a sleep deeper than death, his eyes holding a profound, chilling calm. He listened to Aris's briefing, his gaze moving between the faces of the small and strange team, the linguist, the engineer, and the Dreamweaver. "So the chickens have come home to roost," Silas said, his voice a low, steady baritone that had lost none of its authority. "We hid from the galaxy, and the galaxy came and found us anyway. You want to fight a war of the mind against a god? It's a fool's errand." "It's the only errand we have," Aris countered. Silas smiled, a thin, knowing expression. "Good. Fool's errands are the only ones worth running. But your weapon, your question, it's a beautiful, poetic idea. Doctor, it will also fail." The statement landed like a stone in the geothermal workshop. "What do you mean?" Aris demanded. "The Veil's mind is a collective." "Yes." Silas explained, pacing the grimy floor. "But it is not a democracy. It's a hierarchy. Like any vast system, it has a central processor, a nexus point. You are trying to poison an ocean by dropping a single vial of ink into it. You need to find the heart. Inject your poison there." "The ship," Kalen grunted. "The crystalline thing in orbit." "Precisely," Silas confirmed. "That ship is not just a vessel. It's the synaptic hub of their consciousness on this world. All the assimilated minds of Ethel are routed through it. If we can broadcast your mimetic virus directly into that hub, we don't just poison the ocean, we give it a heart attack." The plan shifted, becoming bolder, more suicidal. They couldn't just broadcast from the safety of their subterranean lair. They needed to get a transmitter close to the Veil ship. They needed to go to space. Kalen's face darkened. "All our launch facilities are on the surface, fully under their control. We have no way to get a payload into orbit without them knowing. We don't need a launch facility," Silas said, a glint in his eye. "We need a cannon." He pulled up an old schematic from the archive on the main console. It was a design for a mass driver, a colossal electromagnetic catapult built into the planet's northern mountain range. It had been Ethel's original lifeline, used by the founders to launch colony ships and supplies into orbit before the primary spaceport was constructed. It had been decommissioned for over a century. "It's a relic," Kalen protested. "The power conduits are shot. The guidance system is archaic, and we'd need a week just to clear the debris from the launch tube." "Then you have 6 days," Silas said flatly. While Kalen and a small team of loyal, similarly neuroatypical engineers he'd recruited from the Corps set off for the northern mountains, Aris and Alara worked on refining the mimetic weapon. It was no longer enough to simply ask the question, "Who am I?" They needed to weaponize the concept of selfhood. Aris, guided by the bloody annals of Earth's history, began weaving in darker, more potent human concepts. He encoded the raw, brutal drive of ambition, the corrosive suspicion of paranoia, the cold, isolating pride of ego. He took the psychological diseases that had torn his own species apart for millennia and distilled them into a virulent psychic payload. Ilara's role was to shape it. She described it as tuning a weaponized frequency. "The Veil's harmony is a pure, clean tone," she explained. Her eyes closed in concentration as she interfaced with a prototype transmitter. Your code is noise, screaming noise. I have to wrap your noise inside their tone, hide it. So they don't just reject it. It has to feel like it's a part of their own thoughts. A doubt that blossoms from within. She was creating the ultimate Trojan horse, a psychic bomb wrapped in the language of peace. The work took its toll. Eris barely slept, his mind a battleground of ancient terrors and existential dread. He saw Lyra's placid face in his nightmares, her eyes glowing with the collective's light, her voice joining the chorus that whispered his failure. He was fighting for her, but to save her. He was becoming a monster, wielding the very darkness that had plagued humanity since its dawn. Was he saving Ethel, or was he merely ensuring it would fall to a human madness instead of an alien one? He found his answer one night in a quiet conversation with Silas. The old revolutionary was watching orbital trackers, his face illuminated by the slow, steady crawl of the Veil ship across the sky. "You are wondering if the cure is worse than the disease," Silas said, not looking at him. Eris nodded, unable to speak. "The Veil offers the peace of the grave." Silas continued, "It is oblivion. What you are offering is a chance to feel again, to fight again, to fail again. You are offering them the chaotic, terrible, beautiful burden of being human. Don't ever mistake that for a curse. Doctor, it is a gift." Days later, a coded message arrived from Kaelin. It was a single image, a view from the top of the northern mountains, looking out over the curve of Ethel. In the foreground, gleaming under the faint light of a nearby nebula, was the massive, newly uncovered barrel of the mass driver, aimed at the heavens like a finger pointing at God. Below the image were 2 words, "Ready when you are." The time had come. Iris, Alara, and Silas prepared for the final phase. They would travel to the mass driver in a shielded geothermal transport, carrying the payload, a small, hardened satellite containing the transmitter, loaded with Aris's mimetic plague and tuned by Alara. Once there, Kaelin would launch it on a high-velocity trajectory that would take it screaming past the Veil ship. During that brief window, lasting only a few seconds, Alara would focus her full psychic might, using the satellite as a relay to inject their question directly into the ship's core. It was a plan with 1,000 points of failure. As they loaded the satellite into the transport, Eris took one last look at a small, framed photo he kept with him, a picture of him and Lyra on their wedding day, her head thrown back in a joyous laugh, her eyes alive with a fire he was desperately fighting to rekind. He wasn't just launching a weapon, he was launching a prayer, a desperate hope that somewhere inside that placid, harmonious collective, the woman he loved was still there, waiting for a reason to be chaotic again. He was going to give her one. The journey north was a silent, tension-fraught crawl through the underbelly of a dying world. Kaelin had mapped a route through a network of forgotten geothermal maintenance tunnels, massive arteries of rock and steel that bypassed in the serene, occupied surface entirely. The transport vehicle was a hulking, pressurized crawler, its interior a cramped space smelling of hot metal and ozone. The only light came from the red glow of the instrument panels, casting their faces in demonic shades. Eris sat hunched over the payload, a sphere of polished chrome no larger than his head, making final adjustments to the mimetic code. He was no longer adding, but pruning, refining the psychic attack into its purest, most virulent form. He had built a weapon out of human fallibility, and it felt like holding a live viper beside him. Ilara was in a deep trance, her breathing shallow, her hands hovering inches from the sphere. She was attuning herself to its frequency, memorizing the shape of Aris's noise so she could push it through the veil's psychic defenses with all her strength. Her face was beaded with sweat, the strain of containing the chaotic code already immense. Silas was at the helm, navigating the treacherous, unlit tunnels with a preternatural calm. He monitored the surface scanners, his expression unreadable as the crawler rumbled beneath the cities and towns of their placid, enslaved population. "Surface resonance is spiking," he announced, his voice flat but carrying an undercurrent of urgency. "They're gathering in the city plazas, the open fields, everywhere." "Are they looking for us?" Kalen's voice crackled over the comms from the mass driver site. "No," Silas replied, his eyes fixed on a topographical display. "They're not looking. They're waiting. The ship is moving into a geosynchronous position directly above the northern mountain range. Above you." Kalen. Eris felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. It wasn't a coincidence. The Veil knew. Not what they were planning, perhaps, but that a pocket of dissonance, of rebellion, was centered in the north. Their quiet god was turning its eye upon the source of the irritation. The final 100 kilometers were the worst. The crawler had to surface to traverse a deep canyon, and for a terrifying 10 minutes, they were exposed. They moved under the cloak of a meteorological anomaly, a freak dust storm Silas had been tracking, but the psychic pressure was overwhelming. It was as if the entire planet was holding its breath, its collective mind focused on the mountains ahead. Aris could feel Lyra's presence in the psychic hum, a faint, familiar melody lost in the overwhelming chorus. The longing to simply give in, to lay down his burden and join her in that quiet, was a physical pain. He gripped the photograph of her, the sharp edge of the frame digging into his palm, a small, grounding point of reality in a world of whispers. They reached the mass driver facility at twilight. It was a place of stark, brutalist beauty, a colossal concrete and steel structure carved into the face of the highest mountain on Ethel. Kalen and his team of grizzled engineers met them at the entrance to the launch control bunker, their faces grim. "We're ready," Kalen said, foregoing any greeting. "The capacitor banks are charged to 97%. Any higher and the whole mountain might liquefy. The guidance is approximate, but it should get the payload into the right celestial zip code." Inside the bunker, the air was thick with the smell of scorched wiring and the low thrum of immense power. A massive viewport looked out onto the launch rail, a metallic groove that ran for 2 kilometers up the mountainside before ending abruptly, pointing at the sky. And hanging in that sky, now visible to the naked eye, was the Veil ship. It was no longer a distant shard of light, but a vast, crystalline structure, its semi-translucent facets catching the last rays of the setting sun, glowing like a malevolent jewel. It pulsed with a soft, internal luminescence, a visible manifestation of the psychic power it held. It was beautiful, and it was the most terrifying thing Aris had ever seen. There was no time for speeches, no time for final words. They loaded the payload into the launch cradle, a sleek, aerodynamic shell designed to withstand the crushing acceleration. As Kalen began the final launch sequence, the psychic pressure intensified tenfold. The very rock of the mountain seemed to groan under the strain. Alara cried out, clutching her head, as the Veil's collective mind began to actively probe their location. It's searching, she gasped, her voice strained. It feels our thoughts. It knows we're here. Aris rushed to her side. Focus on the payload, Ilara. Not on them. Feel the question. Become the question. Let it shield you. Silas stood at the viewport, his hands clasped behind his back, staring up at the enemy ship with an expression of grim satisfaction. They've become arrogant in their unity, he murmured. They have never faced a concentrated, intelligent act of defiance. They feel our hatred, our fear, and it fascinates them. They're leaning in for a closer look. That's our window. Capacitors at 100%. Kalen yelled over the rising scream of the machinery. Launch in 30 seconds. The countdown appeared on the main screen. The numbers stark and red. Ilara collapsed to her knees, her body trembling, but her eyes, when she opened them, were clear and fiercely focused. She placed her hands on the launch cradle's housing, her mind now linked directly to the payload. I'm ready, she whispered. Aris stepped back. His work done. He could only watch. The final 10 seconds of the countdown were the longest of his life. He saw it all flash before his eyes. Lyra's laugh, the sterile white circle on her final canvas, the data ghosts of Earth's bloody wars, the faces of his small, insane band of rebels. He had brought them all to this moment, to this single, desperate throw of the dice against a silent god. 5, 4, 3. The mountain shook. The lights in the bunker flickered. 2, 1. Kalen slammed a large, red button. There was no explosion, no roar of rockets. Just a profound, bone-jarring thump and a sound like tearing reality. On the viewport, a streak of incandescent white light shot up the launch rail at impossible speed. It hit the end of the track and vanished into the sky. A silver needle aimed at the heart of the crystalline ship. Payload is away, Kalen shouted. Trajectory is messy, but it's on course flyby in 90 seconds. Now it was all on Ilara. Her eyes were rolled back in her head, a thin trickle of blood running from her nose. The psychic backlash from the Veil ship, now fully aware of the projectile, was immense. It was a focused wave of pure mental dominance, an order to cease, to submit, to die. But Ilara held on, her mind a fortress built around a single, corrosive idea. Almost there, she gritted out. Almost. Aris watched the orbital tracker, his heart hammering against his ribs. The tiny green dot of their satellite was closing the distance to the massive icon of the Veil ship. Flyby in 10 seconds. The ship in the sky began to glow brighter, its crystalline structure shifting. It was trying to erect a psychic shield, a wall of pure harmony to block the incoming projectile. Now, Ilara, now! Silas roared. Ilara screamed, a raw, human sound of ultimate effort, and through the entirety of her consciousness, her will, and Aris's mimetic poison up the invisible beam, connecting her to the satellite. For a fraction of a second, the satellite pulsed with a dark, violet energy before it streaked past the Veil ship. And then, silence. The satellite was gone, vanished into the void. The ship in the sky remained, impassive, silent, unchanged. In the bunker, the only sound was Ilara's ragged breathing as she collapsed, unconscious. Kalen stared at his monitors, his face ashen. No effect. Their resonance signature is stable. No change at all. Failure. The thought was a cold, physical blow. They had fired their only shot, and the god in the sky hadn't even flinched. Eris felt the last of his strength leave him, a sense of despair so profound it was almost peaceful. He sank to his knees, his gaze fixed on the viewport, on the beautiful, terrible ship that had eaten his world. And then he saw it. A flicker, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor in the ship's internal light, a single, discordant pulse in its otherwise perfect glow. Then another, and another. A faint, chaotic arrhythmia was spreading through the crystalline lattice. It was like watching a drop of black ink slowly, inexorably, spread through a glass of pure water. On Kalen's screen, the perfect sine wave of the Veil's song began to shudder. A tiny, jagged spike appeared in the pattern. Then another. The harmony was breaking. Eris's question, wrapped in Ilara's will and delivered by Kalen's cannon, had found its mark. The heart attack had begun. The initial effect was subtle, a neurological tremor in a planetary consciousness. On the surface, the citizens of Ethel simply stopped. Their synchronized, graceful movements ceased. They stood in the plazas, in the fields, in their homes, their heads cocked slightly as if listening to a confusing, internal noise. The serene, beatific smiles faltered, replaced by expressions of profound bewilderment. The perfect harmony that had bound them together was fraying, and for the first time in months, a million individual minds were experiencing the terrifying vertigo of silence. Inside the Veil ship, the chaos was exponential. Eris's mimetic bomb was not a weapon of destruction, but of creation. It did not kill. It birthed. Within the singular, unified consciousness, it created a second voice, a voice that asked, "Who am I?" This simple query, alien to a mind that only knew we, acted as a seed of pure paradox. To answer the question, the mind had to define I, which necessitated separating a part of itself from the whole. The moment it did so, the core of its being, its unity, was compromised. The first I was born. Then, fueled by the encoded human concepts of ambition and paranoia, that new self sought to protect its existence. It saw the surrounding we not as part of itself, but as a threat. It began to fight for cognitive territory. The we fought back, trying to reabsorb the dissonant thought. The result was a psychic civil war raging within the mind of a god. In the bunker, they watched the effects in horrified awe. The light of the ship in the sky was no longer a steady, gentle pulse. It was a frantic, strobing chaos of conflicting colors. Jagged flashes of angry red and paranoid violet warred with the calm, dominant blue. Kalen's monitors showed the Veil's psychic resonance shattering into a million discordant frequencies. "They're tearing themselves apart," he whispered, his usual gruffness replaced by disbelief. "The core command structure is in a recursive loop. It's trying to purge a part of itself that it can't define." On the surface, the confusion was turning to fear. As the central command of the Veil flickered, the psychic leash on the population of Ethel went slack. Memories, emotions, and thoughts that had been suppressed for months came flooding back. A woman in a plaza looked at her hands as if seeing them for the first time. A farmer stared at the sky, a single tear tracing a path through the dust on his cheek. The process was agonizing, a violent rebirth. People cried out, not in pain, but in the shock of rediscovering their own voices. Fights broke out, fueled by the lingering paranoia of Aris's code. Arguments erupted as individual egos, raw and newly formed, clashed. The serene tomb of Aethel was being reborn into the beautiful, messy chaos of humanity. But the war was not over. The Veil, though mortally wounded, was still a galactic power. The ship began to convulse, its crystalline structure fracturing. "It's purging," Silas said. His eyes narrowed, his strategist's mind seeing the final moves on the board. "It's trying to save the whole by sacrificing the limb. It's going to sever its connection to Aethel." A planet-wide groan echoed through the bunker as the ship began to pull away from its geosynchronous orbit. But it wasn't just leaving. A section of the ship's underbelly opened, revealing a focusing lens of immense size. Energy, raw and terrifying, began to gather. "It's going to sterilize the planet," Aris said, his voice hollow with horror. "It can't reassimilate us, so it's going to erase its mistake." "The mass driver is a one-shot weapon," Kalen growled, his hands flying over the console. "The capacitors are drained. The launch rail is slag. We have nothing to throw at it." "We don't need to throw anything," Silas said calmly, pointing to Kalen's geothermal monitors. "We are standing on the biggest gun in the system." Aris understood instantly. The geothermal core, the planet's heart. It was a mad, final gamble. Using the emergency command codes Silas had sliced from the archive, they bypassed every safety protocol governing the geothermal core. Kalen, his face a mask of terrifying concentration, began to reroute the entire energy output of the planet. Instead of distributing it across the continental power grid, he focused it into a single, massive conduit that led to a decommissioned volcanic vent directly beneath the mountain. He was turning the planet itself into a directed energy weapon. "This is going to crack the tectonic plate for 1,000 kilometers, one of Kalen's engineers yelled, his face pale with fear. "It might," Kalen grunted back, not taking his eyes off the cascading readouts. "But it's better than being boiled alive from orbit." As the ship above finished charging its weapon, a beam of pure, white-hot energy lancing down toward them, Kalen completed the final bypass. "Opening the iris," he said, almost conversationally, and slammed his hand down on a final switch. With a roar that was felt more than heard, the peak of the mountain blew outward. A column of incandescent plasma, the very lifeblood of their world, erupted from the earth and shot into the sky. It was not a precise beam, but a chaotic, uncontrolled blast of pure planetary fury. It struck the Veil ship not as a weapon, but as a force of nature. The crystalline structure, already weakened by its internal war, shattered like glass. The psychic scream as the collective mind died was a wave of pure agony that washed over the planet. A final, terrible note of a symphony ending in a crash of broken instruments. And then, for the first time in over a year, there was silence, real silence. In the aftermath, Aethel was a world awakening from a long, strange dream. The sky was clear. The psychic hum was gone. In Oakhaven, Lyra dropped her paintbrush, splattering white paint on the floor. She looked at the perfect circle on her canvas, and a look of profound disgust crossed her features. She stumbled out of their silent house and onto the balcony, her breath catching in her throat as she saw the raw, beautiful chaos of the chasm for what felt like the first time. She whispered a single word into the wind. Eris. Aris Thorn and the others returned not as heroes, but as ghosts. The world they had saved was broken, terrified, and confused. But it was alive, and it was free. The Grey Restoration, as the historians would call it, was a long, difficult road. The lingering paranoia from Eris's code took a generation to fade, but the spirit of Ethel, its vibrant, argumentative soul, had been rekindled in the fire. Eris never took a position of power. He returned to his work, to the study of language, but with a new, somber understanding of its power, not just to connect, but to destroy. He and Lyra found their way back to each other, their relationship rebuilt on the shared trauma of what they had lost and what they had regained. Her art became famous across the slowly reconnecting colonies, her canvases filled with images of beautiful, terrible chaos, the birth of a star, the heart of a storm, the fury of a world fighting for its own mind. Silas, the old revolutionary, helped guide the new council, ensuring that the lesson of Ethel was never forgotten, that true peace cannot be imposed. It must be chosen, with all its messy, imperfect consequences. Ethel never cut itself off from the galaxy again. They became cautious explorers, diplomats who understood that the void held both wonders and terrors. Their greeting to new civilizations was not one of fear or dominance, but a simple, profound statement. Born from their scars, we have a voice. Let us hear yours. Years later, Eris stood with his granddaughter on the balcony overlooking the serene chasm, watching the ghost fire blossoms open. The wind was whispering through the rocks, a symphony of infinite, beautiful noise. What does it say? Grandpa, the little girl asked. Eris smiled, a real, warm smile that finally reached his eyes. It says, he replied, that it's good to be loud,